This weekend's job is we're going to be doing a little bit of a tune-up on the old Jeep here. We're driving to work. It's got a bit of a stumble on the way. It'll be like a little bit of a, like it feels like it's skipping or a lag or it's stumbling. It seems to labor on the highway while we're driving. You notice it most on a hill. Maybe if you're pulling something, when you're working the engine, that's when you notice the drag. The first thing I'm going to target is the distributor down in here. So we want to change the distributor cap and rotor. To me, that's the most wearable item out of this system because the rotor's spinning around and then it's between the rotor and the contacts. What I would choose next for the next most wearable component in the system is the spark plugs. In both cases, you're going to have a gap, and it's that repeated spark that's firing. As the more time that goes by, it increases the gap and increases the wear. That's what I mean when I'm talking about a wearable component. The least of the items are the wires because there's no gap involved in the wires. They're just transmitting the spark. So unless you have damaged insulation on the wires or something like that, that would be my last choice. First thing I'm going to do is make a quick sketch before I dismantle anything. And what I'm doing here is this is the top of the distributor cap and the location of the spark plug wires. If we take a look at the distributor cap here, this side over here has like a square end, and this side over here has a round end. So that's what I've done in the picture here. So this is basically the top, that's your square end, that's your round end. This is as it looks in the vehicle. Once I've made the sketch, now I don't have to worry about getting the plugs mixed up after I remove them and then I go to put them back on. So the next step is you just got 2 screws here, and those are going to have the Phillips end on there. So you just need a screwdriver. You'll take off all your spark plug wires, and then you'll loosen off those 2 screws, pull that off of there. Underneath, you're gonna find the rotor. Here's the rotor here. The rotor has basically a locator spline in there to go on the end of the shaft, so you can't mix it up. And you put that, you take the old one off, you put this one on. What we're looking at when we're replacing these pieces is you're looking for, like, you know, burn marks, heat wear on the end of here. This is going to be the piece that rotates inside the cap. Down inside the cap here, you can see kind of like that buildup or wear, I guess, if you want to call it that. That is where the rotor is spinning around, and then that is your air gap between those 2 components there. Next, we have all of our spark plugs. When you take a look at the spark plug there, it doesn't look too bad. It's not wet, it's not carboned up, but if you check the gap in there, it's opened up. These ones here are probably about 50 thou plus, and depending on whatever the spec is for your vehicle, it's going to be less than that. I think 40 is pretty much max gap for a standard factory plug. What you could do, in fact, you could tighten up that gap by making it, bringing it back to, say, 35 or 40 thou. And you would do that with a tool like this. The tool fits in like so, and then you're going to either pull it up or down to manipulate that gap. You'd probably have to do it a couple of times before you achieved what you wanted for your regapping of the plug. You could probably regap the plugs and run them a little longer. Here's a gapping tool here where this slide progressively gets thicker as it goes around. So you just put it in there, you slide it till it stops, and then it tells you where it's at. And as you can see there, it's around that 50 thou gap. And we would want it closer to, say, 35 or 40. So when you buy the new plugs and you're going to install those, really this is just a check. You would put something like this on there to check the gap and record what you have, and if it's not correct, then you would adjust it with that previous tool that I was showing you there. Some people that are for and some people that are against lubricating the threads to put those plugs in. I personally lubricate the threads. You can use anti-seize, you can use oil, you can use WD-40, some kind of lubricant that'll help you install it and hopefully help you take it out in the future. Now, anti-seize is probably going to be the best option because it is made for that heat. When you go to remove these in the future, that anti-seize it'll definitely help you remove the plug in the future. Now when it gets to removing the plugs here, what I've got is you got to get yourself a spark plug socket here, and that's just got a rubber, kind of like a rubber isolator in there, and that's going to protect the end of the plug when you're removing and installing it. So that's a 5/8 that we've got for these plugs here. Then I've got a swivel. This swivel is what you're going to need for number one plug. Number one plug is closest to the front of the engine. And then you'll probably get away with just using an extension and the socket for 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that extension may be too long for number 6. So then either use a shorter extension, again with the swivel, to get an angle in there so that you can get that last one out. When you're all said and done, check out your torque spec. So when you put the plugs back in, say 25, 30 foot-pounds is around in the ballpark. Some of these plugs here will have other instructions on the box. And in this case here, I do believe for this plug here, there's some kind of instruction that you would tighten this up till it stops, and then you want to move it however many of these dashes. I mean, that's all well and good, but it's going to be pretty difficult to see that in there. So I don't use no dash method. I use torque. Like I said, look it up. You'll be in around 25 or 30 foot-pounds. Should be good. That'll get you to where you want it. So after the plugs, then the last thing we got is the wires here. I ordinarily wouldn't change my wires every time I change my plugs or cap and rotor. It depends on the shape of these things. I mean, if your insulation, if your boots are ripped or torn or cracked, or there's any kind of physical damage on these rubber insulation on the wires, you definitely probably want to change those out, because that's going to cause shorts and arcing and stuff like that. If there's a break in the insulation, that spark that's coming down, instead of it making all the way to the spark plug, what ends up happening is, if it's by close enough to a piece of metal, it'll arc there instead of at the spark plug. That is the problem with the wires. Now in my case, what happened was, you're pulling on the end of the wire, you're pulling this off of the spark plug. Well, this was left behind. So that piece would have been left on the end of the spark plug like this, and then you pull that off. Well, there's no way you're going to get that back on there. So now this wire's no good. I did change the wires. I had two or three of those where that happened, and then I have this damaged one back here where this is number 6, and it was very hard to get at and pull out of there. It ended up ripping and wrecking it when I tried to get it off. When you're pulling it off by hand by the back like this, that is what's going to cause this condition. You want to get yourself a pair of pliers, something like this, and you want to grab it in around here. This is likely where it's engaging that plug there, and then you want to grab it here and then pull it off, and then you've got a better chance of pulling off the wire without ripping the end of it off. So that's pretty much it. What we did was we changed the cap and the rotor, the wires and the plugs here. Get rid of that stutter, that skipping kind of condition while you're driving. You can just, you can feel it while you're driving, especially on the highway at a steady speed. It feels kind of like a skip or a jump or a lag or whatever you want to call it, but you'll notice it. It's either going to be one of two things. It's either going to be failure points in your spark system here, or the gas. And what I did was I upgraded the fuel to premium fuel, and it did help, but I still had the condition. It was just reduced. Now I'm doing both. I did a tune-up for the electrical end of this, for the spark control, and then better fuel, and then we'll see where it goes from there.